At 14:43 on the afternoon of November 9, 1944, Corporal Desmond Wright sat against a birch tree 400 meters north of the Hürtgen Forest's southern edge. The air was cold. Wet snow had fallen 2 hours earlier. The ground was mud beneath a thin layer of frost. Everything smelled like pine sap and cordite. Wright was a medic. He carried no weapon. He had been trained at Fort Sam Houston for 8 weeks. His squad had mocked him for it. They called him the Boy Scout. He was 22 years old and had never fired a rifle in combat. His medical bag weighed 14 pounds. Inside were 6 morphine syrettes, compression bandages, sulfa powder, and 2 tourniquets. The bag had a red cross painted on white canvas. It made him visible from 300 meters in good light. His platoon had been cut apart 40 minutes earlier. Mortar fire came first. Then automatic weapons from a concealed position to the east. 11 men went down in the first 30 seconds. Wright had moved between them while the rest of the squad pulled back through the trees. He dragged Private First Class Eugene Keller into a crater. Keller had taken shrapnel through the abdomen. Wright gave him morphine and packed the wound with gauze. Keller died 6 minutes later. When Wright looked up, the rest of his squad was gone. The forest was silent except for the wind moving through bare branches. He could hear boots on frozen ground approximately 200 meters to his south. German voices carried clearly in cold air. They were moving north in a sweep line. Wright had no radio. He had no weapon. He had a medical bag with a red cross that identified him as non-combatant under the Geneva Convention of 1929. He sat very still against the birch tree and waited. The 28th Infantry Division had entered the Hürtgen Forest on November 2nd. The objective was to reach the Roer River dams 15 kilometers to the east. The forest was 12 kilometers of dense pine and steep ravines. Visibility averaged 40 meters. Radio communication failed between the trees. Artillery could not be adjusted effectively. The Germans had prepared the ground for 6 weeks. By November 8th, the division had advanced 900 meters. Casualties exceeded 40% in rifle companies. Trench foot disabled more men than enemy fire. Resupply required human pack trains because jeeps could not navigate the mud. Wounded men died in collection points because stretcher bearers could not move them through the terrain. Battalion commanders requested withdrawal. Corps command denied the request. The offensive continued. Company E of the 110th Infantry Regiment had entered the forest with 147 men. After 7 days, 83 remained. Desmond Wright was one of 4 medics still operational. The other 3 had been wounded or killed in the first 5 days. Wright had treated 62 casualties. He had saved 14 men. He had watched 48 die. He weighed 138 pounds. Before the war, he had worked in his father's pharmacy in Terre Haute, Indiana. He had wanted to be a chemist. The Germans had withdrawn their regular Wehrmacht units from the Hürtgen 2 weeks earlier. They replaced them with the 275th Infantry Division, reinforced with elements of the 89th. These were veteran troops from the Eastern Front. They knew forest warfare. They used the terrain. They moved at night. They set up interlocking fields of fire that turned every clearing into a kill zone. They mined the logging roads. They zeroed their mortars on every approach. American units learned not to bunch up, not to use the trails, not to seek cover in the obvious places. They learned slowly. Wright's platoon had been moving through a draw between 2 ridgelines when the mortars opened. The Germans had ranged the area precisely. The first rounds landed in the center of the formation. The second salvo walked back toward the rear. Men scattered into the trees. 3 machine guns opened fire from positions on the eastern ridge. The guns were positioned in depth, separated by 60 meters, mutually supporting. The platoon had walked into a prepared ambush. Lieutenant Marsh was killed in the first exchange. Sergeant Hoynes took command and ordered withdrawal to the west. The men moved in pairs, using trees for cover, laying suppressive fire as they fell back. Wright stayed in the draw with the casualties. He moved from man to man. He applied tourniquets. He injected morphine. He shouted at men to keep pressure on wounds. The machine gun fire slackened after 8 minutes. The Germans stopped shooting when the Americans stopped moving. Wright finished with Keller and crawled to Corporal Bianchi. Bianchi had been hit twice in the chest. He was still breathing, but the breaths were shallow and wet. Wright opened his bag. He heard movement in the trees to his left. He looked up. A German soldier stood 20 meters away, rifle raised. The soldier was young, maybe 19. He wore a Zeltbahn camouflage poncho and a coal scuttle helmet. He stared at Wright for 3 seconds. Then he lowered his rifle and moved past, heading north. Wright understood. The Red Cross meant something. He was being allowed to work. He finished with Bianchi and checked the others. 6 men were dead. 5 were wounded but stable enough to move if help arrived. Wright had no way to call for help. He decided to wait until dark, then attempt to guide the wounded back to American lines. He moved to the birch tree at the edge of the draw and sat down. His hands were covered in blood. He wiped them on his trousers. He was very thirsty, but his canteen was empty. At 14:43, he heard the boots again. This time they were closer. The voices were louder. Wright counted at least 12 men, possibly more. They were conducting a sweep to clear remaining American positions and collect intelligence from the dead. Standard doctrine. Wright remained motionless. The Red Cross on his bag was visible. He placed his hands on his knees, palms up, to show he was unarmed. The first German came into view at 14:46. He was an NCO, older, maybe 35. He carried an MP-40 submachine gun. Behind him came 5 more soldiers in a loose file. They moved carefully, checking bodies, looking for wounded who might still fight. The NCO saw Wright and stopped. He said something in German. Wright did not move. The NCO walked closer. He looked at the Red Cross. He looked at Wright's empty hands. He nodded slightly. Then he shot Private First Class Morgan in the head. Morgan had been unconscious, wounded in the legs, no threat. The NCO fired 1 round from 4 meters. Morgan's body jerked and lay still. The other Germans laughed. One of them said something that made the others laugh harder. The NCO turned back to Wright. He smiled. He raised the MP-40 and aimed it at Wright's chest. Wright did not move. The NCO held the aim for 5 seconds. Then he lowered the weapon slightly and spoke. Wright did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a test. The NCO wanted to see fear. Wright showed nothing. His face remained blank. His hands stayed on his knees. The NCO stepped closer. He kicked Wright's medical bag. Bandages and supplies spilled into the mud. The Germans laughed again. The NCO bent down and picked up a morphine syringe. He held it up and said something. Another soldier responded. They were joking about the medics' useless equipment, about Americans who carried medicine instead of guns, about how easy it was to kill men who refused to fight back. The NCO tossed the syringe into the trees. Then he reached down and grabbed Wright by the collar, hauling him to his feet. Wright stood. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall. The NCO was taller, heavier. The German pushed Wright backward. Wright stumbled, but did not fall. The NCO pushed him again. The other soldiers formed a loose circle, watching. This continued for 90 seconds. Push, stumble, laughter. Wright did not resist. He kept his hands visible. He did not speak. The NCO grew bored. He shoved Wright hard against the birch tree and stepped back. He unslung his MP-40 and worked the bolt. He said something to the others. They raised their weapons. Then the NCO spoke directly to Wright in broken English. "You have 1 minute. You run, maybe you live. You stay, you die here." Wright looked at him. He looked at the 6 soldiers with rifles and submachine guns aimed at his chest. He looked at the bodies of his squad scattered in the draw. He looked at Morgan with half his head missing. He calculated distances, angles, cover. There was none. The nearest tree thick enough to stop bullets was 30 meters away across open ground. The Germans would cut him down in 5 steps. The NCO raised his wrist and looked at his watch. "Now you have 50 seconds. Wright turned and ran. He moved west, away from the German lines, into the thicker forest. He ran in a crouch, weaving between trees. Behind him, the Germans counted down in English. 40 seconds, 30 seconds. They were laughing. This was entertainment. The medic would run until he exhausted himself. Then they would hunt him like an animal. It was a game they had played before. Wright ran for 20 meters. Then he dropped behind a fallen log and lay flat. The Germans could not see him, but they could hear him. They would follow the sound. He controlled his breathing. He pulled his medical bag around and opened it quietly. Inside, beneath the remaining bandages, was something the NCO had not seen. Before the platoon entered the forest, Sergeant Hoynes had given Wright a weapon. Hoynes had insisted. Wright had refused, citing his status as a non-combatant. Hoynes had pushed the weapon into Wright's bag anyway and told him to shut up about it. The weapon was a Colt M 1911A1 pistol. It weighed 2 pounds 9 ounces. It held 7 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. 8 rounds total. Effective range was 50 meters in trained hands. Wright had fired the weapon once during basic training. He had hit the target 3 times out of 7 attempts. He pulled the pistol from the bag and checked it. The magazine was full. A round was chambered. The safety was on. Wright flicked the safety off with his thumb. The click was very loud in his ears. He did not know if the Germans heard it. 20 seconds, the NCO called. Wright looked around the end of the log. The 6 Germans were advancing in a line, weapons ready, moving carefully through the trees. They were spread approximately 5 meters apart. The NCO was in the center. They were 40 meters away, too far for accurate pistol fire. Wright waited. 10 seconds. The Germans were 30 meters away now. Wright could see their faces. They were smiling. This was fun for them. The NCO raised his hand and the line stopped. He called out, "Time is finished, medic. Now we come find you." Wright rested the pistol on the log. He aimed at the NCO. The front sight wavered. His hands were shaking. He took a breath and held it. The sight steadied. The NCO was 28 meters away, partially obscured by a thin pine. Wright adjusted his aim 6 inches to the right to account for the tree. He squeezed the trigger. The M 1911 fired. The sound was enormous in the quiet forest. The round struck the NCO in the upper chest, just below the collarbone. The impact spun him sideways. He dropped the MP-40 and fell to his knees. The other 5 Germans froze for 1 full second, trying to locate the source of the shot. Wright fired again. The second round hit the soldier to the NCO's left, a private with a Kar 98K rifle. The bullet entered his throat. He went down without making a sound. Wright shifted aim and fired a 3rd time. The round missed. The remaining 4 Germans scattered, dropping prone or diving behind trees. They began firing blind into the forest, spraying automatic fire in Wright's general direction. Rounds hit the log and the trees around him. Bark exploded. Bullets whined off into the distance. Wright rolled left, away from the log, and crawled behind a thicker oak. The Germans were still firing, but they had not pinpointed his location. They were shooting at where they thought he was, not where he had moved to. Wright counted rounds. The MP-40 fired at 600 rounds per minute. Cyclic rate meant nothing in practical terms. Magazines held 32 rounds. Riflemen carried 5 magazines on average. The shooting slowed after 20 seconds as men changed magazines or conserved ammunition. Wright looked around the oak. He saw movement 30 meters to his right. A German soldier was crawling through the undergrowth, trying to flank his position. Wright waited until the man paused to look around. Then he fired. The round hit the soldier in the side. The man screamed. It was a high, thin sound. He tried to crawl backward. Wright fired again. The second round silenced him. 3 down, 3 remaining plus the wounded NCO. Wright had 3 rounds left in the pistol. He ejected the magazine and reached into his medical bag. There were no spare magazines. Sergeant Hoynes had given him the weapon, but not the ammunition to sustain a fight. Wright had 8 rounds total and he had fired 5. 3 rounds left. The forest went quiet. The Germans stopped shooting. They were listening, trying to locate him by sound. Wright did not move. His back was pressed against the oak. His breath came in short, controlled pulls. His heart was beating very fast, but his hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. A voice called out in German, then in English. "Medic, you are surrounded. Put down the weapon. You are non-combatant. We will respect this if you surrender now." Wright did not respond. He scanned the trees. He saw nothing. The Germans were concealed, waiting for him to reveal his position. Standard infantry tactics. Fix the enemy in place, then maneuver for a killing shot. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The cold was seeping through Wright's uniform. His hands were numb. He flexed his fingers around the pistol grip to maintain feeling. He had 3 rounds. He had to make them count. Movement to his left. A shadow shifted behind a cluster of pines 20 meters away. Wright aimed but did not fire. The shadow moved again, faster this time, crossing from one tree to another. Wright tracked it. The soldier broke cover and sprinted toward a fallen log closer to Wright's position. Wright fired. The round caught the man in the leg. He fell, rolled, came up shooting. His rifle barked twice. One round hit the oak 2 inches from Wright's head. Wright fired again. The soldier stopped moving. 2 rounds left, 2 Germans remaining, plus the NCO. Wright heard boots running. The sound came from behind him. He spun. A German soldier was charging his position, screaming, firing an MP-40 from the hip. The rounds went wide, shredding leaves and branches. Wright aimed and fired. The pistol clicked empty. He had miscounted. The magazine had been 1 round short, or he had fired without realizing. The charging German was 10 meters away. Wright threw the pistol at him. It hit the man in the face. The German stumbled but kept coming. Wright grabbed his medical bag and swung it. The 14-pound bag caught the German across the jaw. The man's head snapped sideways. He dropped the MP-40. Wright swung again. The bag connected with the side of the German's helmet. The man fell. Wright dropped on top of him. They grappled in the mud. The German was stronger, but Wright was faster. He got his hands around the German's throat and squeezed. The man bucked and thrashed. His hands clawed at Wright's face. Wright held on. The German's movements weakened. After 40 seconds, he stopped struggling. Wright rolled off the body and grabbed the MP-40. It was covered in mud. He wiped the receiver and checked the mechanism. It seemed functional. He found 2 spare magazines in the dead German's belt pouches. One was full. One had approximately 20 rounds remaining based on weight. Wright had never fired an MP-40. He had seen them fired. He understood the basic operation. Safety lever, bolt, trigger. Simple. He heard movement again. East, approximately 40 meters. The last German was repositioning. Wright crawled to a new position behind a thick spruce. He wiped mud from his eyes. His uniform was soaked. His hands were cut and bleeding. He ignored it. The voice called out again. "You have killed many. This changes nothing. You will die here." Wright recognized the voice. It was the NCO. He was still alive, Wright calculated. The NCO had been hit in the upper chest. Possibly a lung shot. Possibly not fatal if the round missed major vessels. The man was still mobile, still giving orders. That meant 1 soldier remained, plus the wounded NCO. Wright waited. 5 minutes passed. The light was fading. In another hour it would be dark. Darkness favored the defender. Wright knew the forest behind him. The Germans did not. If he could survive until full dark, he could escape. But the wounded men were still in the draw. 5 men who might survive if they received treatment. Wright had abandoned them to fight. If he fled now, they would die. He had taken an oath as a medic. The oath did not include exceptions for self-preservation. He made his decision. Wright moved east, toward the German position. He moved slowly, using every piece of cover, pausing every few meters to listen. The forest was silent, except for wind and the occasional crack of settling ice. He covered 30 meters in 10 minutes. He saw the NCO. The man was sitting with his back against a tree, one hand pressed to his chest. His face was pale. Blood had soaked through his tunic. The MP-40 lay across his lap. His eyes were open and scanning. He was watching for movement. 10 meters to his left, partially hidden behind a deadfall, Wright saw the last soldier. The man was young, maybe 18. He held his rifle ready, but his hands were shaking. Wright raised the MP-40. He aimed at the NCO first. The man was the experienced fighter, the greater threat. Wright's finger tightened on the trigger. Then he stopped. If he fired, the last soldier would return fire. Wright was exposed. The MP-40 was unfamiliar. He might miss. Even if he hit the NCO, the young soldier might kill him before he could acquire the second target. 2 targets, uncertain weapon, poor position. Bad odds. Wright lowered the weapon, he thought. The Germans were waiting for him to approach. They expected him to come from the west, from where he had killed the others. They were watching that direction. Wright was now to their south. He had flanked them without being detected. He moved in a wide arc, staying low, using the terrain. He came around behind the young soldier's position. The man was 15 meters away, focused to the west. Wright could see his profile. The soldier's hands had stopped shaking. He had steadied himself. He was ready to fight. Wright considered shooting him in the back. It was the tactically sound decision. The soldier was an enemy combatant. He had participated in the execution of wounded Americans. He had laughed while doing it. He deserved no consideration. Wright raised the MP-40. He aimed at the center of the soldier's back. His finger rested on the trigger. He applied pressure. Then he thought about the oath, about the Red Cross he had carried, about the morphine syrettes and the bandages and the men he had saved, about who he was. He shifted his aim to the soldier's leg and fired. The burst was 3 rounds. The weapon pulled high and right. 1 round hit the soldier in the calf. The man screamed and fell. The NCO turned and fired. Rounds tore through the space Wright had occupied. Wright had already moved. He sprinted left, dropped behind a log, came up shooting. The MP-40 bucked in his hands. He fired in controlled bursts the way Sergeant Hoynes had taught the squad. Short pulls, 2 to 3 rounds, relocate. The weapon was lighter than he expected. The recoil was manageable. The NCO was trying to stand. Wright fired again. The burst caught the man in the shoulder and neck. He fell backward and did not move. Wright turned the weapon on the young soldier. The man was crawling, trying to reach his rifle. Wright walked toward him. The soldier saw him coming and stopped crawling. He lay flat and put his hands on his head. Wright stood over him. The MP-40 was aimed at the soldier's back. The man was crying. He was saying something in German, over and over. Wright did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was begging. Wright lowered the weapon. He checked the NCO. The man was dead. He checked the other bodies. All dead. 7 Germans in total. 7 men who had given Wright 60 seconds to run and then hunted him for sport. Wright walked back to the young soldier. The man had not moved. Wright knelt beside him and examined the leg wound. The bullet had passed through the calf muscle without hitting bone. A painful wound, but not life-threatening. Wright opened his medical bag. Most of the supplies had spilled during the fight, but he found a compression bandage and sulfa powder. He applied both to the wound. The soldier watched him, confused. Wright finished the bandage and stood. He pointed west, toward the American lines. The soldier understood. He nodded. Wright helped him to his feet. The man could walk with difficulty. Wright handed him a broken tree branch to use as a crutch. Then he pointed again, more emphatically. The soldier nodded again and began limping west. Wright watched him go. Then he gathered the German weapons and disabled them by removing firing pins or bending barrel sights. He threw the parts into the undergrowth. He kept 1 MP-40 and 4 magazines. He walked back to the draw where his squad had fallen. The 5 wounded men were still there. 2 had died while Wright fought. 3 remained alive. Wright checked each man's condition. He administered morphine. He changed bandages. He did what he could with what he had left. Then he sat down beside them and waited for dark. At 17:22, he heard American voices. A patrol from Company E had been sent to locate the missing platoon. They found Wright sitting in the draw with 3 wounded men and 11 dead Germans scattered through the surrounding forest. Wright told them what had happened. The patrol leader, a lieutenant named Voss, did not believe him until he walked the killing ground and counted bodies. The after-action report filed by Lieutenant Voss on November 10, 1944, stated the following facts. Corporal Desmond Wright, medic, Company E, 110th Infantry Regiment, engaged and killed 7 enemy combatants using a pistol and captured submachine gun. Wright expended 8 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition and approximately 60 rounds of 9mm ammunition. Time elapsed from first contact to final engagement was 18 minutes. Wright suffered no wounds during the engagement. 3 American soldiers survived due to Wright's medical treatment under fire. Wright was recommended for the Silver Star. The recommendation was denied by battalion command. The denial memo stated that Wright had violated his status as a non-combatant by engaging in offensive combat operations. Medical personnel were authorized to carry weapons for self-defense only. The memo noted that Wright's actions, while personally courageous, represented a breach of the Geneva Convention and could not be officially recognized. Wright was reassigned to a casualty collection point 8 kilometers behind the lines. He served there until the Hürtgen offensive was abandoned on December 16th. He treated 437 casualties during this period. He was awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service in February 1945. The citation made no mention of the engagement on November 9th. Wright survived the war. He returned to Terre Haute in August 1945 and worked in his father's pharmacy for 32 years. He married. He had 3 children. He never spoke about the war. When asked, he said he had been a medic and had done his job, nothing more. The German soldier Wright allowed to live was never identified. No record exists of his surrender or capture. It is possible he reached German lines. It is possible he died in the forest. The details were never determined. The M1911 pistol Wright used was recovered from the engagement site and returned to Sergeant Hoynes. Hoynes carried it for the remainder of the war. After the war, he gave it to his son. The weapon is now in a private collection in Ohio. The current owner does not know its history. Desmond Wright died on March 3, 1989, of heart failure. He was 66 years old. His obituary in the Terre Haute Tribune-Star mentioned his service as an Army medic in World War II. It did not mention November 9, 1944. No one at his funeral knew what had happened in the Hürtgen Forest. The forest is still there. The trees are taller now. The ground has healed. Nothing marks the place where it happened.